This is part A of the Khudilar campaign, World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. That is the newspapers collectively known as Fleet Street. Now, this one, the one here on front page of the Times, let's make it, so unites links to companies investigated for bribery. Now, this is the one that is byline to three names. One is Andrew Norfolk. The other two are Louisa Clarence Smith. And the last one is Matt O'Donoghue. Now, this one refers to the Unite Trade Union. The trade union is called Unite, and its general secretary is Len McCluskey. And this refers to activities, connections between the still under investigation mayor of Liverpool City, Joe Anderson, and his son, David Anderson, and Unite's General Secretary, Len McCluskey. Now, these allegations. First of all, we have to qualify this because of the record of Andrew Norfolk. Andrew Norfolk is a proven racist, despite the fact that he was the named reporter that had the items about the sexual exploitation and abuse and crimes, mainly against white girls, done by England-born gangs of Pakistani origin, mainly Pakistani origin. But Norfolk got exposed as a racist over making up a series of lies against Muslims in connection with an alleged adoption of a blonde Christian girl. That is the description the Times carried through the Tower Hamlets Council in London. And most of the evidence showed up Andrew Norfolk as a liar and a racist, anti-Muslim liar. So having said that, we shall discuss this one about Liverpool and Unite's links to companies investigated for bribery. This campaign, nor myself personally, individually, have any connection with any council, any group or organization involved in this. And we are not pursuing an agenda. This is an objective campaign, objective analysis, objective diagnosis of Fleet Street, based objectively entirely on the objective evidence. And our interest in this item is part of our interest and long-standing engagement against corruption by local councils, through local councils, and the lack of democracy and democratic accountability by local councils. So the fact that it is an elected mayor at the expense of the city of Liverpool is not something we created. It is there on the facts, on the evidence, that an elected mayor anywhere in England should be found to be involved in criminal activities that are still under investigation. So he's not a convicted criminal on these allegations, but he is under investigation on corruption and bribery and all the abuse of the money. Now, the abuse of the money is here in this story concerns the money and the contracts given by the Unite Union. And the son of Joe Anderson, David Anderson, who was also arrested along with his father, Joe Anderson, last year, is the boss of a health and safety consultancy that is also under investigation. And so therefore, what we are looking at is, again, a tip of the iceberg. And the Times is not really reputed for investigation into council corruption, unless the Times' ownership by Rupert Murdoch, the dirty digger, and his agenda suit such investigation. That is to say, in the case of Tower Hamlets, the Muslim foster parents and foster family, it was anti-Muslim agenda that Andrew Norfolk enhanced and made up the accusations against the particular people that he attacked. And in the case of Liverpool, in the case of the allegations against Unite and Len McCluskey, this is a right-wing agenda that they're applying. Now, having said that, we are not in any way, shape, or form excusing any genuine evidence that exists against Joe Anderson, David Anderson, Derek Hatton, and of course Len McCluskey, must be taken to the, objectively speaking, highest point of auditing and accountability in the context of the criminality alleged and the criminality actually found. But they would not be doing the same kind of zealous investigation, the Times would not, had the perpetrators been right-wingers and conservatives and reactionaries and connected with big business. And the evidence that they would not be doing that is in the fact every day of the Times is published in the Sunday Times and the Times group, that is the Murdoch group. They hide 99% of the crimes by the right wing and the big business and criminals. And they would not be doing that if the perpetrators were so-called non-Tories, let's say. To call them left-wingers would be an abuse and distortion of language. So we move on from there for the time being and reflect on the fact that the so-called campaign against an elected mayor in Bristol, there is no evidence that the campaigners would actually succeed. But our campaign has supported them in principle by pointing out the fact that they are doing the campaign. And it is unlikely that the campaign, so-called in Tower Hamlets, against the elected mayor corruption, or the corruption that is the elected mayor post, I don't believe that at this time, at this date, there is sufficient or significant evidence that that campaign will succeed. Because it's a question of numbers. how many people actually vote for scrapping of the elected mayor post, which is a criminality. The post is the criminality, not the campaign for scrapping the criminality. And this is something to do with the numbers, not the principles. Unless there is enough kind of signatures or enough numbers of people calling for the ending of the corruption called the elected mayor post, this corruption will continue. And it will take another generation before it is scrapped, by which time it will have added more damage to the people of Tower Hamlets. And the same applies in Newham, next door to Tower Hamlets. And again, this is the prospect that the campaigns will not succeed is not a guarantee that they will not succeed. It is just looking that way at this date, at this time, and to our campaign based on the evidence that is accessible at this time in the current circumstances. So we shall update in due course on that. And before we end this particular segment or this particular statement, let's say that regardless of the kind of system or the structure of the council, either mayor system or elected mayor system or so-called leader-led sections council. Essentially, all the councils in England are corrupt. So the key to ending corruption includes the scrapping of the obviously corrupt elected mayor system, but not stopping there. There are dozens of other things that must be done radically and in the dynamic ongoing process to keep the requirements of democracy rigorously applied and applicable by the holders of elected posts in the given councils. As we are doing the diagnosis of the Fleet Street papers on Saturday, 16th of January 2021, we shall be looking at the latest parade of lies for the Boris Johnson fronted cabal about virus, but it's actually in denial of the truth about the failure, negligence, corruption, abuse by the Boris Johnson fronted cabal under all kinds of excuses to hide the truth about the negligence and incompetence and callousness and cruelty and multiple standards of denials. So there is this item about right to buy. The right to buy is being the Thatcherite kind of a gender narrative, taking away public land and public resource under the guise of a right, which is completely anathema to the general framework of the conservatives' agenda, which is to do away with all rights, which is being featured in some of the papers today, where, including The Guardian, where Ed Miliband is focusing on the group called workers' rights. They're not talking about human rights of the ordinary people, ordinary voters. They're talking about workers' rights, and that is a lethal stupidity. Lethal stupidity by focusing on workers' rights. Now, the majority of the people are not workers in that sense in that definition. So the workers' rights is a phrase that is directly linked to the trade unions, dictating the agenda to the Labour Party. And the Labour Party is thus being, if you like, exposed as not addressing the whole population. So they talk about right to buy to be introduced, the conservatives, to be introduced for abandoned properties, land and derelict buildings. This is not about housing people. This is against housing people. And this is by denying and reinforcing the denial of universal objective, human housing, human rights of the majority. And the tokenistic comment attributed to a man called Mike Amesbury, shadow housing minister, that is the Labour Party's answer to the housing cabinet member, who is Robert Jenrick. And another one called Tom Chance, chief executive of the National Community Land Trust Network. So these are two of the so-called opposition to the conservatives' agenda, but these two are both welcoming the Robert Jenrick right to buy scam. So we go back to the original thesis based entirely on the facts that the Labour Party is part of the problem, and the Labour Party is equally to be blamed for causing the loss of housing, human rights, and the causing of the massive numbers of homelessness and lack of housing. In this context, we refer to somebody who has put a question, short question to the Khudilar campaign on the Facebook account. We have several Facebook accounts belonging to our movement, but this particular one is called Khudilar, and it's a comment that we accessed about 2 hours, or in the last 3 hours, let's say. And the question says, what have you got against the London Renters Union? Now, our answer is not about having anything against the London Renters Union. Our answer is that the London Renters Union is misleading, making misleading statements, making false statements, making dishonest statements. And all of these are to be found in the London Renters Union refusing or failing or choosing to allow the London Borough Councils to enjoy impunity and immunity from accountability and criticism. And the London Renters Union is actually focusing its falsely claimed campaign on private landlords, what is called private landlords. We have no problem with that. The problem is that they are not focusing anything like that kind of attention on the wrongdoings of the local councils at every stage. We posted on the Facebook that we shall be continuing to publish fuller details during the rest of today, but we shall be doing that during the rest of today and also in the days and weeks to come. The London Renters Union is a craftily named kind of organization, London Renters Union, but it's not really representative of the most acute misconduct by the local councils and other failures by the local courts. Failures and negligence and corruption and criminality perpetrated by local councils against housing human rights and also condoned de facto by the behavior of the London County Courts, where most of the evictions are rubber stamped. Eviction applications are rubber stamped, and there is no real say by the victims of the eviction claims against the lies and the illegalities involved in the eviction applications. So what they're saying, these two persons, one is Mike Embersley, Shadow Housing Minister, and Tom Chance, Chief Executive of the National Community Land Trust. They're capitulating to the Robert Jenrick plan. So it actually gives away the game about the claim by Tower Hamlets Council or the opponents of Robert Jenrick generally that Jenrick's bribery or involvement in the bribery by the pornographic billionaire Richard Desmond over the West Ferry Road print works degeneration, multi-billion pound degeneration, was politically kind of confined to the Tories. We are saying that is not the case. In Tower Hamlets as well, in the first 5 years of the current century, thousands of council-owned housing properties were given away to mainly two gangs of criminals operating under Poplar Harka and Tower Hamlets Community Housing. And that criminal handover or giving away of billions pounds worth of properties, council properties, was done by the DEFRA that was fronted by the completely stupid John Prescott. Prescott sucked up to Tony Blair in return for Blair allowing Prescott to pose as the Deputy Prime Minister. And Prescott continued to claim that he was not politically of the right wing. But what he did in Tower Hamlets, Prescott did, was worse than the deeds of ordinary right-wingers. He played the key part in forcing Tower Hamlets Council to hand over to criminals these thousands of council properties. So there is no evidence on which to base any expectation, let alone any claim, that if in power, the Labour Party will undo the further grave damage that the Conservatives are doing to housing stock, land that belongs to the community and the public. So, when we condemn the London Renters Union's behavior on the evidence, we do not do that because we want to condemn London Renters Union, but because we want to condemn their role in particular context. And there is no likelihood that the London Renters Union or those who are involved in it from behind the scenes will ever oppose the conservatives at all, because this is the middle of January 2021, and the ban on evictions, permanent ban on evictions that has been needed and was partly imposed in March 2020 by Robert Jenrick, the ban has been lifted and it has not been imposed, despite the fact that the rate of the infection and the virus is higher now in January 2021 than it ever was during the first, let's say, calendar year of the infection, 2020. And there is no evidence that a single member of the Labour Party in the House of Commons is making any coherent, substantive, significant demand for the introduction or imposition of the ban on evictions. And the fact that the ban has been lifted is not something that is peripheral. It's a central evidence of how negligent and cruel to the victims of the denial of the basic rights on housing the Conservatives are, and how colluding the Labour Party in Parliament has been and is. And there is no sign whatsoever that any of the so-called smaller parties like the Greens and the Lib Dems are any match to what needs to be done. And ideologically, the Lib Dems are as conservative, right-wing, as the right-wing Conservatives are and have been. And the Greens have only one MP. Caroline Lucas was a member of the European Parliament for years before she became a member of Parliament in Britain. And Caroline Lucas didn't contribute anything. She didn't contribute anything in the sense that she didn't make any substantial headway in opposing corruption in the EU bureaucracy or corruption generally in the European Parliament. She hasn't changed. She's not made anything about the corruption of the Johnson-fronted cabal or the corruption of the Theresa May-fronted cabal or the corruption of the David Cameron-fronted cabal. And she hasn't made any significant contribution that can be actually given credit for significance against the idea of Brexit and against the idea of the Brexit corrupt propaganda being done by Farage and Johnson et al. So where do the people go? This is the question that emerges at every edition that we do of the Diagnosis of Fleet Street, which shows that none of the parties, none of the MPs, none of the parliamentarians is up to the job, up to the task, up to the need, up to the requirements of society in terms of safety, in terms of health, in terms of ending racism and inequality. So if there were no religion, that is to say, any organized kind of faith promising the alternative to the corrupt materialistic systems, then a religion would have to be invented. Because materially, there is nothing in existence that actually meets the needs of the truth being told, truth being upheld, and truth being defended at every stage. And here, the Murdoch controlled Little England, their headline. That's the headline on the front page of the Murdoch scum. Now, this gives the gullibles, the majority being indigenous white English persons. And this gives them the brainwashing direction and confidence that we are being protected. That is to say, they are saying in possessive terms, they are being protected by the travel ban. All travel corridors axed. Keep out. UK shuts borders over mutant bugs. Now, there is no evidence that the bugs are coming from the other countries. We are not saying that there should not be any restrictions, but what we are saying is that there is no distinction being made between the fact that the bugs or the infections are all over the place and they are not moving, the virus is not moving, the infection is not spreading based on the borders of nationality, patriotism, and all the other rubbish. But that kind of rubbish is being peddled by this scum to shore up Johnson in that post. And this is a kind of echo. This is an echo of the Brexiteering lies that once Brexit was done, a scripted phrase, "Get Brexit done," was the lying cry that Boris Johnson mouthed. That once Brexit was done, Little England would take back control. But the Little England is not taking back control whatsoever. Because no matter what the strength of the stupidity of keeping out suggests, the reality is that the virus will get in and stay spreading. And they've got the same kind of heading on the I newspaper. And this is a title that is being edited by a bunch of Little Englanders now, who are following the same line in the narrative of the Murdoch scum. And what they're doing is denying the truth of the problems at every stage. There is no accountability, there is no equality, there is no opportunity. For most of the people, discriminated against by the few, controlling the decisions. And here is the Star back, the Daily Star, back on a comic mode. It's running the front page splash, ridiculing the current transport minister in Boris Johnson's cabinet. The minister is a proven liar. So they are running this one saying, "Don't ask me, I haven't got a clue." That is what they're saying, that the Grant Shapps is saying. That is about the travel ban and so on. And what they're saying is that a quick question to the Transport Secretary, responsible for travel: should we be booking a summer holiday this year, sir? And it's a piece byline to someone called Steve Hughes, which says, clueless Grant Shapps says he is the last person to ask for travel advice in lockdown, even though he is the bloke in charge of transport. Now that's a contradictory paragraph, because he is not in charge. If he were in charge, he would not be denying responsibility. And he would not be saying that don't ask him. And there is a page 3 where they've got two items. One is about Judi Dench, and the other is about an air stewardess called Daisy, who has swept the sky for the studio. And obviously, Judi Dench is around 80 years old, and Daisy is a 23-year-old. So the two women are being given side by side the coverage. Judi Dench is saying that she doesn't, and actors don't, like looking at other actors while playing the parts. And the globe-trotting Daisy is being kind of painted as wanting people to look at her physique. Now that's objectifying women's bodies. And there is no arguing about that. So that's what the Daily Star does. And the fact that it does do that, and the majority of the gullibles that actually patronize and buy this paper and keep this paper in circulation, however declining the circulation is, shows that Fleet Street, as embodied, literally embodied by the Daily Star, is sleazy, pornographic, and devoid of any rigor. And they've got another page, which is page 15, where the camera is firmly zoomed on the legs of Jennifer Lopez. And the headline there is Jolos got sex appeal. Laid back Jennifer Lopez puts on a leggy display as she launches her first ever beauty range. Now, there is nothing comparable to this one about a man or any number of men. Has not been. So who is exploiting the bodies of women? It's Fleet Street. And there is no sign that there is any campaign that is currently ongoing, as I said yesterday, against the objectification of women's bodies by Fleet Street. And as I said many times before, the scum owned by the Dirty Digger has made billions of pounds for the Dirty Digger, who then launched his empire as Fox News and other acquisitions show. And that is based on the money that he looted from the gullibles in Little England, brainwashing them into buying the scum and the news of this cruise, which he scrapped under pressure from the Levison inquiry spotlight. And they're talking about another, this is the page 3, it's Ashley Roberts. And they're saying they're scum. Ashley Roberts can't wait to shed her coat and show off her tan, even in dismal January. Now, what they mean by the tan is actually her body. So it's a corrupt language and the corrupt agenda. And they've got another page, 2-page spread on Rebecca Bardi, who is the wife of a footballer, currently in litigation because she brought a defamation action against Colin Rooney. And the outcome so far of the proceedings in her litigation action suggest that Colin Rooney will be forced to settle the claim rather than contest it. But essentially, what they're doing, the scum, is promoting the sub-pornographic kind of assets of the wives and girlfriends. So this is the majority of the people in Little England whose brains are stuffed full of this kind of objectification of women's bodies. Now there is a piece here that they say on the same page, page 3, about John Barker, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, who is apparently billed for the next series of Strictly Come Dancing. So they're talking about John Barker in the editorial, and that has to be against him because of their agenda. Only the BBC could imagine offering John Barker a fortune in license payers' money to star on Strictly is uncontroversial. To many people, he is far from the lovable eccentric of Remainer fantasy. Serious bullying allegations against him cost him a peerage, and as the impartial Commons Speaker, he tried to help install a rogue, unelected government aimed at negating 17 million Brexit votes. Barker would thus have inflicted Trump-style damage on our stability and democracy. The fact that the BBC cannot see it is indicative of its problems. And yet we were sadly mistaken to think this government would finally tackle BBC bias, waste, and the absurd anachronism of the mandatory television tax. The peak for the new chairman calls the license terrific value and doesn't even believe the corporation was anti-Brexit. On the BBC, Downing Street seems to have lost its nerve. So this is the lying distortion of all the evidence, and they're having a go at the BBC, not only at John Barker as a Brexiteer, as a Remainer, but at the BBC itself. And we have said before, we are not an agent or supporter or fan, let alone apologist for the BBC at all. What we are saying is that the attack by the Murdoch scum on the BBC has nothing to do with the BBC's problems that we identify as being dishonest, corrupt, and misleading and lying to the public about all issues concerned, and being, of course, racist. What we are saying is that this edition of the Murdoch scum is as corrupt as any other edition that has been published since Murdoch took over. The scum about 50 years ago. And what this scum is doing is absolutely the same thing that Murdoch once done, lying to the public and lying for an unequal society, a racist society, and a corrupt society, which suits him. And he has done that in backing Donald Trump all the way until Donald Trump was defeated at the election in November 2020, when the relevance of giving Trump the publicity and the platform in terms of the agenda that Murdoch backs and promotes and has been aiding and abetting disappeared. So now he will concentrate Fox News and others' attention on undermining the opposition to the agenda of Trump, the opposition that is expected but may not materialize under Joe Biden. And the contents of the Daily Boris Graph today are again promoting the image of Boris Johnson's cabal. And before moving any further, we have to say that for the second calendar year now, Fleet Street has not told the truth about the virus. All the headlines, all the editorials, and all the opinions, and all the so called explainers are not about the virus. They're about propaganda under the general cover of the virus. So other agendas are being pursued. So when they say that anti-vaxxers are the problem, or the anti-vaxxers are part of the conspirators, they are only partly accurate on the facts, but they're not mainly accurate on the facts, because it is not a conspiracy mentality to ask questions as to what it is that the vaccine does or will do, because there is no time. There is not any time since the so-called jabbing has been commenced in Britain. There has not been enough time passed to show that the vaccine has actually prevented the infection. Think about that. There is no item. There are 2 to 2,500 pages, 2,000 to 2,500 pages of so-called newspapers from Fleet Street today, Saturday, the 16th of January 2021. And despite all these paginations, all these numbers of pages containing, supposedly, the majority of those pages supposedly containing news, the main news about this country. There is no news about the country if the actual pandemic is scrutinized on the conduct. What does the virus do? And as we said in the phrase, A to Z is not there. What does it do from A to Z? How does it affect the person? And what does it do during the infection? There is no explanation of that at all. There has never been. That's number one. Number two is there is no evidence or evidence-based or fact-based information for the people of the local areas about the actual numbers of people being affected in their areas. So when they say they stay local, stay at home or stay local when you are going out for essential things like urgent shopping, etc., they don't say what part of the local areas are affected by what numbers. There is no numbers, there is no statistics whatsoever about the areas. So ordinary people don't know, literally do not know, which part of their local areas they should avoid and which part they should treat as relatively safe. So Fleet Street essentially is doing what Fleet Street has done for 200 years, lying for the establishment. No matter how fragile, how negligent and corrupt the establishment of the time happens to be. And fragile and corrupt is the name of Priti Patel's regime at the UK's Ministry of the Interior, which is known in the UK as the Home Office. It is reported or speculated in The Guardian today that the lost data or the lost files, more than on 150,000 files. Let's see what the Guardian is actually saying. Now, the Guardian in the front page is saying something about the true scale of the NHS crisis. We shall come to that because they dare to say true. I mean, the Guardian is part of the lying machine of propaganda. And they are doing, without any quotation marks, they're repeating, supposedly to the intelligent reader, they're suggesting here a kind of pun and a mocking of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again, but they're doing it without any kind of evidence that they are actually doing that. So without that evidence that they're mocking Trump, this can be read as they are copying, repeating, and justifying Trump's racist Make America Great Again. Now they are saying, the Guardian is saying, not far into the main kind of paper, they've got a piece, the Guardian have, about the truth about the real extent of damage done by Priti Patel's failure over the leaked or lost data. Now, this is page 23, not too early into the paper, but it's actually page 23. So, the Patel, that is Priti Patel, the interior minister in the Boris Johnson fronted cabal of a so-called government. Patel is under fire after error wipes potential suspects' DNA and fingerprint files. Now, what they're saying there is a piece by three byliners. Sarah Marsh, Jamie Grierson, and Bikram Dodd. Fingerprint, DNA, and arrest history records have been deleted, which could allow offenders to go free because evidence from crime scenes will not be flagged on the police national computer. The Home Office said it was working with police to assess the impact of the error, which reportedly occurred by accident during a weekly weeding session to expunge data. It said no records of criminals or dangerous persons had been deleted, and that the wiped records were those of people arrested and released when no further action was taken. But the Times said crucial intelligence about suspects had vanished because of the blunder, and that the Britain's visa system had been thrown into disarray, with the processing of applications suspended for two days. The Home Office released a statement from the policing minister Keith Malthouse, but the Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas Simmons said this was not good enough and called on Patel to provide an urgent statement. Now, again with the shadow minister on anything, as in the case of the housing and the plot by Robert Jenrick to extend right to buy to abandoned lands and properties, derelict properties. This is the case with the equivalent in the Home Office ministry and its labor shadow. What good is that going to make available to the system and to the people that are affected by the loss of the data, by Priti Patel being asked to make a statement? A statement is not what is needed. What is needed is a root and branch replacement of the corrupt system, the negligent, incompetent, unfit system. But that's not what the Keir Starmer fronted cabal, so-called opposition, and its shadow minister in this field is asking for. And we take this commentary and this narrative, the diagnostic narrative, fact-based, world-exclusive narrative, to the failure of the NHS, the National Health Service. Because as at this date, today, the 16th of January, 2021, the majority of the countries in Africa and Asia, that is based on the reports that are accessible from London. So that may not be the conclusive statement, but it's an indicative, general statement saying that the virus is spreading less in Africa and Asia than it is, say, in Britain. Think about that. Why? Of course, there are dozens of questions that dozens of factors involved in this. But the fact that Britain is experiencing an increase, serious increase in the spread of virus, and the failure of the so-called health system, health service, to meet the needs of the affected people. This takes the narrative, the diagnostic narrative, back to the origins of the launching of the National Health Service idea. And over the last 70 plus years, the idea of the National Health Service has not been implemented. The idea of the National Health Service has not been implemented in 80% of the cases, let's say. And the idea, of course, includes the need to equip with education, with training, and with education with kindness, education with the outlook that is not biased, not racist, not prejudiced. Education that is universally based, ethically based, morally based, to deliver the service equality-based service based on the needs to people who need the service, regardless of their ethnicity, their nationality, their religion, their gender, on their wealth, and their wealth or lack of wealth. So this is where the Labour Party has been continuing to fester, failing. And as we said about the item about Liverpool City's mayor, Joe Anderson, and the question by the Times on the behavior of the Unite Union and its General Secretary, Len McCluskey, and others, including Derek Hutton. The Labour Party is exposed as being corrupt. So the difference between the Labour Party in power and the Conservatives in power, and ideologically, whether either is in power or not, there is no substantial difference between the two. And as the 1970s scandal, John Paulson and Reginald Maudling, their scandal showed, the main political parties in Britain were not only against corruption through local councils and central government, because Maudling was the Home Secretary, Conservative Home Secretary. There is no difference between the parties or among the parties, because there was a Liberal Democrat party involvement, party membership involvement in the Paulson crisis or the Paulson scandal. So what we are doing in this diagnosis is we are looking at all the key factors in the actual practices in this country at every level, central government level, local government level, trade union level. And we are saying that there is no awareness, let alone admission, of corruption ruling the main agenda of both parties or all three parties. We say all three parties because of the last 10 years history, let's say. Because Sick Clegg, who is now the propagandist for Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and being paid millions by Zuckerberg to act as Zuckerberg's European propagandist. Sick Clegg entered into collaboration, coalition with the Conservatives fronted by the racist criminal David Cameron. And Sick Clegg completely, without hesitation, colluded with the Conservatives' agenda, all the items on the agenda. No wonder, not a surprise, therefore, that when he correctly lost his parliamentary kind of credibility and status and the seat, he was considered by Zuckerberg as a suitable agent and stooge for Facebook's corruption. And none of this is being identified, examined, let alone investigated by any of Fleet Street. Any of Fleet Street, including The Guardian. Including The Guardian and including the Daily Mirror. So what we have seen here today, Saturday, the 16th of January 2021, in the contents of the Fleet Street titles, is not a departure from the lying propagandist role that the Fleet Street papers have been playing for 200 years. So this is not a democracy. Britain is not a democracy. And the British newspapers are not campaigning for democracy. They are not doing the journalism democratically. And the Financial Times is running this piece, which is topical and is typically stupid and dishonest and trendy and racist. It's saying that from Suez, that is Suez Canal, to Brexit and back again. So what they're saying, the Britain's departure from the European Union closes a chapter in which the country served as a bridge between two continents and reopens its long, difficult search for a new role. And this is by Philip Stevens, who is supposed to be one of the Financial Times' thinking kind of writers. And the thinking is typically exposed as thoughtless, really thoughtless. And they've got a piece about the American kind of mulatto woman called Sarah Cooper, the lip sync so-called satirist that has allegedly upset Donald Trump. I would say that she has more accurately created a career rather than upset Donald Trump. And the Financial Times is typically corrupt in that it is talking for big business, not talking for the victims of big business and big looting. The Financial Times plays no part, no significant part in exposing financial corruption whatsoever. And that gives the going away about the Financial Times. And it has got this stupid section called House and Home, FT Weekend. Nothing about the evictions, nothing about the housing human rights of people, nothing about how local councils create homelessness and housing and rob people's housing human rights. And there is nothing in the Financial Times that says anything about the deprivation and denial of rights that are perpetrated throughout the whole year by Parliament, by the UK government and government departments, and by the local councils. And this Boris graph of today, that is Saturday, the 16th of January 2021, is continuing the good news headlines for Boris Johnson. It's all in the future, all achievements in the future. 5 million over 70s to start receiving invitations for jabs. Now look at the completely manipulative and false and misleading statement. Invitations for jabs, not even receive the actual vaccines. Jab is the vaccine, obviously. And then there is a piece by a woman called Juliet Samuel, and her piece is headed, Britain's vaccine scheme justifies Brexit. They are just in the same brainlessness level as Donald Trump and his so-called spewers and supporters, so-called. And they got a piece about the former wife of Boris Johnson and one of his children on the front page. And his former wife, Marina Wheeler, is saying, don't put off cancer screening. So there's a piece about her talking about cancer screening and that is a fact-based kind of piece on page 23. And I got a Bryony Gordon piece about Camilla and Marina Wheeler is quoted as saying that I'll never forget the people who were there when I was in trouble. Boris Johnson's former wife, Marina Wheeler, and daughter tell Margaret Driscoll how they dealt with her cervical cancer diagnosis and urge women not to let the pandemic stop them going to screenings. Now that is a long piece, and we shall not read the piece except to so that it's a fairly reasonable piece. And we shall move on to the piece about the alleged statement by a judge who has said that the suspect in the Lockerbie bombing, the Libyan Megrahi, his family have been unsuccessful. Their application for the appeal to turn the conviction, to set aside the conviction for terrorist atrocity against him, has been rejected by the judge in Scotland. Let's see a bit more of this. Senior judges said yesterday incriminating evidence involving luggage tags ruled inadmissible 20 years ago at the Lockerbie bombers' original trial would have made the case against Megrahi and his co-accused substantially stronger. The ruling came as a court in Scotland dismissed Abdul Basit al-Megrahi's appeal against his conviction for the worst terrorist atrocity in British history. The judgment is a major setback to a long-running campaign to clear Megrahi's name. It will also galvanize American efforts to bring the alleged bomb maker Abu Aijila Masood, currently in jail in Libya, to justice. The family of one British victim said the 64-page Court of Criminal Appeal judgment had strengthened their opinion that Megrahi had been instrumental in carrying out the worst terrorist atrocity on British soil. Pam Dix, 64, whose brother Peter was killed, said, "I am now more and more confident of Megrahi's guilt. I was open to persuasion, but nothing presented by the defense has moved me in the direction of thinking he was innocent." So the 5 senior judges said the weight of evidence against Megrahi, who died aged 60 in 2012, was enough for a reasonable jury to find him guilty. The judges reinforced the strength of the conviction by ruling that a diary entry written by Megrahi's co-accused, claiming he had acquired baggage tags for Megrahi, should have been ruled admissible at the original trial. We shall go into the actual contents of the ruling in due course, but that is a rare kind of piece by the judiciary in any part of the UK, because that is not fact, that is speculation again. But the speculation retrospectively and speculation based on a alleged account by the alleged accomplice of Megrahi's, that this accomplice or co-accused acquired the luggage tags for Megrahi. That is very suspicious, very kind of meanderingly, unconvincingly untruthful and false and misleading. But without reading the whole set of facts covered in the comments, we are not going to go further into this, except to say that ruling by the 5 judges in the Scottish court is consistent with the agenda